That's my ice grill. Peace, y'all. I just wanted to build briefly just about the importance of social studies, which is really the discipline of studying human societies, the interactions of people, which is also the study of the psychology of groups of people. And, you know, when I was young, going through like middle school, high school, my favorite subjects were always social studies and English. Peace, justice. And I just always loved reading and writing. And my social studies teacher made it very engaging and interesting for me, where at a very early age I began to understand like the value of social studies. And a lot of people overlook it. They may not think that it's important, but what social studies allows you to do is to get a very broad as well as technical or specific view of human society, group interactions, and the psychological aspect of how people interact as groups. So nothing along a chronology of world history or her story or my story or your story or our story, nothing along that chronology happens in a vacuum. And when a person doesn't understand the importance of social studies, they tend to look at things as if it's happening in a vacuum somewhere, as if it's isolated, totally cut off from everything else that's going on around them. So, for example, right, when you look at the golden era of hip-hop, the same way that you had the 5% nation very prevalent in terms of leading the charge of consciousness, knowledge of self in that golden era of hip-hop, you still had others who were making party music. You had people who were making gangster hip-hop. You had people who were making a variety of various different music subgenres within the genre of rap music. So if a person is just talking about the golden era of hip-hop, you won't be able to accurately articulate what was going on at that time without including all of those various different other elements or subgenres of rap music that was being expressed. So for example, you can't talk about just the impact that poor righteous teachers made during that particular critical time in rap music without talking about Slick Rick, without talking about Biz Markie, without talking about the Juice Crew, without talking about all of these other various different elements, because you had this cultural cross-pollination that was going on. Not just in rap music, but that happens usually everywhere, you know, unless you're like a part of, I mean, even if you're an isolated tribe in the rainforest or something, to even know about that isolated tribe means that there had to be some type of contact, even if it's from an observational perspective in regards to what is actually going on. You know, so you're always going to have this cultural cross-pollination going on. So social studies is essentially being able to understand that cultural cross-pollination and how various different human societies interact with each other and are influential in how they interact with each other. So that's very, very important, and it's critical because sometimes people have this very delusional perspective of events that take place along the chronology of people being in a society without understanding how, you know, they interact with each other. So for example, it's a 5%. Some of us love to talk about what the father was doing in Harlem at that time and this, that, and the third. And it's like, yo, right sometime after that, Jimi Hendrix was in the Village starting his budding career as a musician and left from there to go overseas and blew up when he went over into Europe. So you don't think that some people that were in Harlem actually hung out in the village and had contact with Jimi Hendrix and the type of music that he was playing and some of the other things that was going on in the 60s? Social studies is understanding those relationships, that you had those various different things going on. I mean, even when you look at the civil rights legislation that was passed in the 1960s, 1964, right? That didn't mean all black people was down with Dr. Martin Luther King and that civil rights legislation. You had a segment of the population that was good. They felt like, yo, why y'all messing things up? Why y'all causing trouble? We good over here. Y'all better leave them white folks alone. So you had a segment of the population that got down like that, And here's the thing. When you talk to black people who are older than 54 years, because that legislation was only passed about 54 something years ago, right? You talk to black people who are in their 70s or whatever, and you listen to them, you get some perspective of where they actually were when that legislation was passed, how they felt about that. You talk to some, and it's like you can get a sense of, especially when they share about where they were living at that time, how they were viewing some of the landscape at that time in terms of the popular music that was coming out, type of clothing or the trends that they were involved in. You can get a good picture sociologically of where this person stood in terms of policies, in terms of legislation, in terms of their relationship to their own people, So, for example, you talk to, my old Earth went back to Essence and Born Power, 95. You talk to my old dad and his perspectives on working in sundown towns when he was younger, how sometimes he'd say he ain't never been no white man's nigga, a lot of different things that you can tell. My father was militant. My old Earth was militant too. And a lot of those perspectives form the family dynamics that I was actually raised with, which gave me an early perspective in terms of our relationship to our people, our relationship in this world, how we should attend this world, how we should navigate in this society, And, there are many of us that don't value as much as we should what social studies is. So sometimes when I'm posting different films that I'm watching or books that I'm reading or other different type of contributions that I'm checking out, I'm encouraging people to take time to do a sociological study of this. Critically analyze its impact, not only in the time that this contribution was released, but also its current day impact in how it's shaping the present day narrative in this society. I'm always looking at things like, where did cross cultural pollination go on? How did this get from over there? Even with the 5%, we didn't start like isolated somewhere. The father had various different life experiences that led to his creation of our nation with his companions. It didn't happen in no vacuum somewhere, just like nothing happens in a vacuum. When you look at yourself, you are a composite not only genetically of your ancestors, but you're also a composite. How y'all doing? All right. You're also a composite of your experiences. The places you've been, the things that you've seen. And that composite is just not genetically or just not a part of your experiences, but it is also a composite of your principles and your values. So social studies is very, very important. Very important. And you can't discount the various different cross-cultural pollination that goes on when various different people get together in the form of a society. So another example of that is when people talk about slavery, right? And they just paint it with a broad brushstroke and just say white and black. That's a very generic way to look at it. But some people who would be classified as white in this society immigrated to this country sometime after the transatlantic slave trade and didn't directly participate in it, but it doesn't mean that they also don't benefit from the inclusion of that status of being white in this society. You have some that came along sometime after that, and they may have been treated like the niggas of the European families. And then later on down the line, their assimilation into American society as Americans have given them the accoutrements and the amenities of being white in American society, even though their ancestors may have not directly participated in owning slaves. You know, doing the social studies allows you to be able to see those subtle nuances that gives you more of a very well-rounded perspective of events that have gone on in the past. But if a person's not looking, they're going to be painting stuff with a broad brushstroke. You know what I mean? So that's very, very important. Very important, because there's things that are going to be left out, and what ends up happening is when a person doesn't do an effective social studies, it leaves blind spots. There's things that you're not even, true indeed, there's things that you're not even looking at. And when you have blind spots, it's easy to be blindsided. It's easy to be blindsided. So just what I mentioned about slavery, right? And Marquise, what he's adding on in regards to some Italians, right? You could be sitting here going in about the transatlantic slave trade and blah, 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 and somebody could just walk right up like, I'm Sicilian. You know, my parents and stuff didn't come over here until, you know, around this time, this, that, and the third, and, you know, and blah, 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 and they have a valid point. Instead of being blindsided with that, do your research and study it so that you can include that in what you add on to begin with, so that you can cover all bases. You know, just like here at the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center, right? This is our network wall. Let me show you this. This is our network wall, which gives you a sense of the route of the Underground Railroad from the south, in particular here to the north, because Niagara Falls is one of the most critical stops of the Underground Railroad. It's one of the last stops before a person actually crosses over the border to get to Canada. So you have a lot of those different critical stops that borders Canada from freedom seekers that were leaving from the south up north. But look at this right here. This map right here also shows you, you see that? People that were leaving to go into other different areas, not just all up north. So if a person's sitting here talking about the Underground Railroad and freedom seekers escaping enslavement, and they just talking about up north, they can easily be blindsided by somebody that's like, nah, you know, my ancestors was down in Mexico. You know what I mean? My ancestors, you know, they were part of the Seminole tribe down in Florida. You know, so you have people who add on in that capacity that understands the various different nuances that adds to the story, but you're only going to see those nuances if you do an effective social studies. You know, so for example, one of the things that when I'm giving guided tours and I talk to people, I make sure that I emphasize to them that not all black people arrived here on those slave ships. You know, some of us are indigenous here because we are the fathers and the mothers of civilization. We've been all over the planet Earth. So when we're talking about the Underground Railroad, we're not talking about all black people got over here on a slave ship and that's how we are here in the United States of America. No. Some of us are indigenous here, and then some of us have been coming back and forth to North America way before the transatlantic slave trade. And I refer people to Ivan Van Sertima's book, They Came Before Columbus, so that they can do further research on that. You know, so if you have somebody that doesn't understand those nuances and they just talking, you know, about this, that, and the third, you leave blind spots. And when you leave those blind spots, it's easy to get blindsided, you know, and you can remedy that and minimize that by doing a social studies. analyze and research various different perspectives around a subject. You know, sometimes people have a very unscientific approach towards study. So a scientist is a person that's dedicated to knowing. Sire comes from the Latin root sire, which means to know. So a person that is a scientist of life, they study life and they're dedicated to knowing what it is. Some people have a very unscientific approach when it comes to striving to learn something, meaning they are out here looking for evidence to support a conclusion that they already came up with, which means it's not objective. They're deliberately overlooking and avoiding any kind of information that contradicts that conclusion that they already came up with, which means that their approach is to leave blind spots. You know what I'm saying? How you doing, bro? Good, good. Were you the brother traveling to?
We headed back to New York State. New York
City. Okay. How much time y'all got?
I try to leave at 12.
Oh, okay. Because we got our Underground Railroad Heritage Center right here.
Yeah.
If you're interested in checking it out.
I guess this is it right here.
You could check out our network wall right over here as well. Yeah. Yeah, so some people have a very unscientific approach. You know what I mean? And because of that, hey, what's going on? Because of that, they create their own blind spots. And creating those blind spots leaves them open to be blindsided by information that they're deliberately avoiding. So as a scientist, you're just out to see what it actually is. That is the approach. That's the most objective approach. And if you're striving to study a subject matter, right, you don't just go out and study the people that's pro whatever it is that you think that you agree with. You study various different perspectives. You know what I mean? You study people that are for what it is that you're saying. You study people who are against what it is that you're saying. You know, you don't just go to Google and just look at Wikipedia or some of the first top searches and think that that's going to cover all of the bases. I mean, if you were to go and study research, put in a hashtag, Atlantis build, right? A lot of my things would come up. You know what I mean? Or things related to the 5% or whatever. But I'm not the only perspective. There are many different various perspectives of our culture, you know? And I'm not the only or the single perspective, you know? And it's important for people to understand that because you can get blindsided, you know? Let me share this. In the 5%, you have various different waves or generations of people who got knowledge of self. So for example, in the earlier days of getting knowledge of self, the father, he was teaching out in the streets. And some of the young that were actually being taught were either in the streets or they got knowledge in some juvenile detention centers. As they got a little bit older, people began to get knowledge in the schoolyards and other different places. It wasn't until some of these young men and women grew up that knowledge of self became accessible in a college environment, because that's when people started to actually go to college, you know? But it took some time to evolve from that point for it to actually expand into these various different other areas. At the same time, if you wanted to get knowledge of self at one point, you had to get knowledge in in New York, because it wasn't accessible in other border states. Now, you can get knowledge of self in Vancouver. You can get knowledge of self in other countries, you know, because it is expanded that way. But at one point, it wasn't there, you know. So it's like when people are not taking a scientific approach to studying things and leaving themselves open to be blindsided, my approach is it's best to be open and non-prejudiced or judgmental and just conscious and sober-minded and aware of whatever it is that you're striving to experience. Because if you go into stuff with your cup full, you ain't gonna have no room to learn anything else. And it's challenging, you know, because a lot of times we may have these preconceived notions about what something is or whatever, but, you know, the scientific approach is the best approach in terms of being able to do an effective social studies on what it is that we're actually experiencing, what it is that we're seeing. But in order to do that, you have to be open to various different perspectives, even perspectives that may not be agreeable or that may be uncomfortable for you. You know what I mean? And a lot of the things I learn are because I'm comfortable putting myself in those uncomfortable situations. Meaning, some guys, they may not want to learn about different perspectives that women have about guys because they may feel personally offended as a guy. So they may not put themselves in certain situations because they don't want to hear that perspective, which cuts them off from valuable information to not only help them grow and develop, but also to be a person who is capable of helping other young men grow and develop as well, and share those perspectives with young women that women have shared with them. And I'm going to tell you, if I didn't have the type of close relationships with women who have felt vulnerable and open enough to share perspectives with me, there's a lot of stuff that I wouldn't know. You know, sometimes I would say at one point I was kind of naive when it came to the things that guys would be doing and saying to women until women felt comfortable enough to share that with me. You know, like the stuff that guys be inboxing women like randomly. Like I really was honestly not aware that guys do stuff like that until I seen it with my own eyes. And I'm like, what? Dudes be doing that? And then it gave me some more context to why some women look at guys, some guys, the way that they do. Because without that exposure, I'm like, man, dudes don't be sending no pictures like that. I mean, I didn't see it until I did. And I'm like, yo, that's crazy. I couldn't even think of doing stuff like that. You know, not only because of my principles and my values, but also professionally, like, you know, but some people that are not really exposed to things like that, it leaves them open to be blindsided, and it creates blind spots in their life. And oftentimes when you hear people going back and forth, talking or arguing or debating with each other, I just sit back and I'm looking at it and I can see all of the blind spots. A lot of times their arguments have more holes in it than Swiss cheese. And I'm like, yo, I can see because they haven't really been exposed like that. And the more exposure that you get to just life, period, the more humble that you become. Because you always know that there is an opportunity for another perspective to be shared that doesn't align with what it is that you actually experience. So you begin to season your words in a way where you understand that, yo, this is my personal experience. This is some of the things that I've seen. These are some of the things that I've experienced. Yet at the same time, you know, I'm open to the reality that there are other different perspectives and other ways that people see things. You know, that's why I function the way that I do, because I've been exposed to so much. And I'm like, you know, there's so much more that I need to learn. And the things that I do know, that I am confident and comfortable with, I speak on that with a sense of assertiveness and a surety. You know what I mean? But the things that I don't know, I'm always open to learning. I'm always open to learning. You know? So social studies are very, very, very important, because nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And one of the recent articles that I wrote about in terms of black mental health in the 21st century, one of the things that I was discussing is how a lot of times in this society, the etiological approach, or the approach towards the origin of mental illness, is always to just victimize or to shame the individual. There's usually no assessment of the societal impact in shaping the consciousness of a person. And it's twisted because it's like, yo, you can see how a person's mental state can affect those that are around them, you know, that may cause them to not only create self-harm, but to harm others. People can get that. You know what I'm saying? Like, this person needs to be somewhere, whatever, because they may injure or hurt somebody, or their ideas may negatively influence the society that we live in. People understand that, but they never really want to talk about how the society itself, which is a manifestation of the consciousness of people, can always and also influence people positively or negatively, when it comes to shaping their consciousness. So it's a two-way street. It's not just people creating society or creating these institutions or the economy that we live in, or directing the resources in a way that's not fair. I mean, it's not just the people that's doing it, but the society itself was established based upon some sick mentalities, and people got to take ownership of that. In terms of ideology or the ideological approach or the origin of sickness, you have to be able to find that within the mission statements of certain institutions. You got to find it in the business practices of certain companies. You got to find it in the pedagogy or the educational approach, or the way in which people teach. You got to find it in all of those different aspects, and it's gonna go all the way back to an individual or a consciousness that did it. But a lot of times people don't want to talk about that. They just want to hold the person individually responsible. But it's like, that person is, study the life of Charles Manson. There's a book that chronicles his life as well as various different other people, and it's called Weeping in the Playtime of Others. And before, I studied and researched different interviews of Charles Manson and some of the things that you learn about him, but his background, this dude spent more time in institutions than he did with an actual family. He was the product of institutions. He was real intelligent, real swift, but he didn't have any family dynamics. He lived from house to house. From a child, he was exposed to a lot of crazy stuff, and to be able to look at how his consciousness was shaped, you can see the effect of that within the context of a society, and why he was so influential the way that he was. So it's important to be able to do that, to do a sociological study, to understand the various different elements or components that play a role in the composite of who a person is. And that happens for the duration of our life. Where we're born at, what we're exposed to, what we eat, for the duration of our life plays a role in shaping our consciousness that is within this form, and our relationships that we forge with people, that plays a role in everything, so nothing happens in a vacuum. You look at films that are coming out today. Look at a few years back when films began to focus on and highlight natural disasters. The apocalypse, things with that particular theme. That was the result of the way in which the society of people were orientated at that particular time. It wasn't something that was happening in a vacuum. People just, producers and directors just like, hey, let's just throw a film out there about something like that. Hell nah. That was reflective of the lives and the interests of the people. But then at the same time, you have people in positions who social economically engineer things that we may assume are trends, things that we may assume are just the interests of the general populace. But in reality, you have people behind the scenes who are actually orchestrating a lot of these things. And the beautiful thing about this, in terms of using social media, is everybody has a platform. Everybody has a platform. Some people don't maximize it. Some people just use it to just, interact with their family maybe, or, they do it for entertainment or whatever, but it's still a powerful platform in terms of directing the consciousness of people. So when I first got involved in producing content online with my website, with my videos, and a lot of that stuff just evolved out of my necessity to help control the narrative, not only of our people, but also of the 5% in terms of our public persona or perspective in terms of what we teach, but also as a member of the human family to make sure that I am aligned with those principles and values that people can universally relate to and would like to identify with in terms of elevating their growth and development. So I was clear about me wanting to do that and to serve that particular purpose before I even got online. I never even got online way back when the internet first started to come into fruition, to just be on here entertaining people and playing around and all this other stuff. Nah, I've always been very clear and very precise about what it is that I strive to do. You know what I mean? And I've been able to maintain that consistently over the years, and that is one of the reasons why I've developed the type of readership and listening base, because of that consistency. You know? But you know, social studies are very important, and that plays a very critical part of how I'm able to do the things that I do. So a lot of the social commentary that I share is based upon my everyday research on various different subjects. And I'm not saying that I'm like Rain Man or something, and I'm sitting in the house all day while it's sunny and shit outside, just with my face down in a book or whatever. But there's not a day that goes past that I'm not studying and researching something that I cannot accurately articulate to you what it is that I'm actually studying. I don't have no autopilot days where if you ask me, hey, what'd you do today? I can sit and talk to you about that and explain to you coherently and articulately what it is that I specifically learned today. And like I tell people often, if you want to really measure or quantify your growth and development, at the end of each day, reflect upon your day. Find something new that you've learned that day, which is evidence of growth and development. Every day do that. It doesn't have to be anything that is voluminous or large or anything like that. It could be just something as simple as finding out that, yo, this church in my community is a food bank these days of the week and offers that to the community. That's something you didn't know before. Now you know it today. That incremental element of growth quantifies your development. Because a lot of times people go through days on autopilot where they just really have no sense of really measuring that they were even here. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know days like that. But one way to be able to minimize and eliminate that is every single day at the end of your day, take some time to reflect on your day, on some things that you've actually learned that day. You know, it could be something very small, it could be something big to you, whatever. Something new that you've learned every single day. That is a way that you could begin quantifying your growth and development, because those small steps equal, you know, a journey once you begin to add those steps together. And a lot of times people want to be somewhere one day, but it takes time to actually get there. You know, it takes investment. And that is one way that you can invest each and every single day. How y'all doing today? Good, good.
There's a heritage center.
Okay, cool. Are you Niagara Falls residents? Okay.
From Williamsville.
Okay, that's cool. How'd you hear about the Heritage Center?
We were at the park and we were walking to Goat Island and we saw there's a thing. So.
Word. Cool. Yeah, so you can just go right inside if you're students or whatever. There's a special rate for students, or if you're in the military. And then once you pay your admission fee, you can come back out here and check out our network wall, and I'll just give you like a general overview of some of the content that you're going to be learning about in our Heritage Center. All right. Thanks. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yo, those of y'all that's in the area, I'm down here at the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center. So, I'll come through. I'll give you a walkthrough of our Heritage Center. It's 825 Depot Avenue here in Niagara Falls, New York. It's inside of our Amtrak station on Main Street, which is right at the border of the Whirlpool Bridge. Oh, word. I got a lot of younger people starting to come into the Heritage Center today. Good. And one looks like my youngest daughter, but her hair is a little bit shorter. Wow. Okay, but yeah, I just wanted to share briefly about the importance of social studies and encourage y'all to, when you are looking at an event that happened in the past, as well as any current day events, consider the other different elements that play a role in that event. You know, like for example, I wrote an article about the Confederacy, right? And the war between the North and the South, right? And this is an angle that a lot of people don't even think about, right? The same way that you have people enlisting in the armed services today that don't really know what they're fighting for, you had the exact same thing going on between the North and the South. Everybody that fought in that war on both sides, they weren't necessarily advocates of what that war was about. You had a lot of young people on both sides who lost their lives just being enlisted and fighting for something that, you know, they never, you know, were actually advocates of, you know. So when the South actually lost that war, you do know that on Veterans Day, on 9/11, on any of these days that celebrates the armed services in this country, you know that the people that were fighting on the Southern side are not honored. At the same time, these national cemeteries, these national monuments, these things that are actually being funded by the citizens of this country, you have Southern citizens who have family members who lost their lives in that war that are funding partially some of these national monuments, national cemeteries, these holidays that celebrate the armed services, but yet their people can't even be buried in these cemeteries. There's no acknowledgement of those younger people that also died in that war. You know, and some of the times when you see people talking about Southern pride and the Confederacy, that is what they're angry about, because every year when you celebrate the armed services, all this other stuff, and America's great and all this other stuff, you are slapping them in the face. It's a consistent disrespect that they feel as Southerners that may have not even been advocates of that platform or what the South was actually doing. Yeah, you have people who were on some, you know, whatever the South was advocating, but you had some, just like in wars today, that were enlisted that died and lost their lives because that's where they lived at, and that was what it was. But people don't talk about that. They don't talk about that. They just think that everybody that's down south is this way, everybody that's up north is this way. No, you have to do a social studies and understand you have various different nuances. Now, the people that I'm talking about weren't in great number, but there are enough of them to consider the fact that you had people that played a role in that war that were like that. So when I'm able to articulate that to some people, they look at me a little different, like, damn, I never thought about that before. You know? Or the fact that I can understand that when that war was over, you had people up north coming down south, walking over the bodies of these young soldiers from the south, taking their own up north, burying them, giving them a proper burial and respect, where you had women's suffrage groups, or you had women groups that were the main ones that began to actually go to these battle zones and take these young soldiers back down south to provide burials for them. But yet, this country talks about, oh, we're united. No, you got people that's still bitter about that bullshit. And every year, You celebrating the armed services and Veterans Day and all this other stuff. You slapping them in the face, calling them losers. That hurts some people. You know, it's a perspective that some people don't consider. But when you do a social studies, you're able to see those various different nuances and say, that's unique. I never thought about that before. But it's a part of the whole story. You know what I'm saying? So let me tie it into this. Wisdom, build or destroy. 2 and 8. Wisdom is discernment. It's right judgment. Build or destroy is construction and deconstruction, right? When you add 2 and 8 together, it creates knowledge cipher. So knowledge, or the ability to know or to have that scientific perspective, you have to have a well-rounded view of things. You got to be circumspect, like Shaborn had mentioned earlier. So having a circumspect perspective of things allows you to see those various different critical points or nuances that play an important role in what it is that you're observing and looking at, but you have to take a scientific approach. You know, that's really the wisdom or the discernment that allows you to build or destroy or to construct or deconstruct some of these things when it comes to just engaging people, maybe even debating people, because you're eliminating and minimizing your blind spots. So when you're circumspect, you're looking at things like this. You're looking at the whole, which means you're minimizing your blind spots. So, yeah, let me get in here, talk to a few of our guests, and take them through. But yeah, if you're here in the area, come through. I'm here all day. Peace.